I hope you guys are strapped in for a bad time today. We're starting out in a poison pool and we've got nowhere to go but down. To start out with, let's explore a teeny tiny bit of Harvest Valley and try to desperately get this green muck off of our shoes. It will continue to build up poison as long as it's on us. I have found that the best way to remove it is to simply run around and gyrate, but it might just entirely be the placebo effect. Let's talk to this nice lady.
Are you a traveller? I'm Chloanne, an ore-stone trader. I travel about collecting rare stones, which I sell to make my living. I never planned to visit this god's-forsaken place. But I don't know. I just sort of ended up here. I must have just wandered in. But now that I'm here, I've been scouting around for rare bits. Oh, don't look at me like that. Many of these stones are quite useful. For instance, certain stones are used in smithing. Oh, now your ears prick up. I've extras if you can pay. This is my trade, after all. I came here in search of rare stones, but the place is nothing like I was told. All this poison, and you can't get very far inside. Don't just go haplessly wandering about. These stones may look all the same, but to the trained eye, each is unique. Some of them are used to smith weapons and armor, and some unique stones provide special benefits. Some of them are extremely rare and should be used with great thrift. None of the differences are easily spotted, but I've learned quite a lot, really. Drang Lake. How is it that I ended up here? It's funny. I can't seem to remember. I've searched every nook and cranny here. I suppose it's time to move on. Perhaps we'll meet again, if we live that long.
Well, I think it's safe to say that at this point, please insert ore stone directly into my bag. I'm gonna buy up her entire stock of shards. Both of these have pretty steep faith requirements, so I think I'll leave them alone for now.
I suppose it's about time I moved shop.
That's all we can do with Chloanne for the time being. Let's brave this poison muck once more and head back to Majula. Even after buying all those shards, we've still got a pretty big surplus of souls. Somehow she beat us back. Let's see how Leningrass is doing.
I knew you'd be around soon. How goes your journey? Take these. They should help a bit. You'll need souls to repair and improve. I know. Oh, don't wait. My witless daughter finally came home. Just as oblivious as she's always been. Well, at least now I can keep an eye on her.
Well, you'd think he'd at least want to go and say hi, but as it turns out, those two never actually speak to each other, ever. It's both weird and kind of sad. I'm gonna upgrade the free falchion we got, just because I like that weapon quite a bit. It's versatile and it's pretty strong. Can't really think of much else to do here. But I do have a bad habit of just finding anything I use even remotely and upgrading that if I have the shards. Let's talk to Chloanne again.
Oh, fancy meeting you here. Speak up if you need anything at all, alright? These stones, some of them are... none of the... You know how they call this place Drang Lake, right? Well, in the old lore, in stories and the like, they said it had another name. What was it? Well, I don't know. It's just something I heard. Since long, long ago, many kingdoms have risen and fallen on this very spot. Each like a great flame that turns to soot. Maybe that's why people don't remember much about the past. You see that blacksmith over there? Is he one of those hollows? He seems to keep eyeing me up. He sort of looks like my father. He's a blacksmith too, you see. The poor man's such a worrywart. But he wouldn't follow me out here, would he? I was born in a land to the west, Volgan, famous for its merchants. There were great, bustling cities. But for me, they were suffocating. And so I set out, in search of stones in faraway lands. There are dangers, for certain, but I much prefer to live this way. But for the life of me, I can't remember how I ended up here. It's as if I were drawn to the place, or lured in. Oh, I don't know. These stones made none of...
Well, we can't say for certain, but given Chloanne's talk of not really knowing why she's even here, there's a good chance that she's undead too.
Visit me again, whenever you please.
As for the identity of that blacksmith over there, I don't know, maybe you could get up 5 feet and walk and ask him.
Bearer, seek less.
There's no excuse for laziness, even if you are afflicted with a curse. As per usual, I just want to keep stats more or less even. Adaptability in particular is something I want to increase as much as I can as soon as possible. As the game goes on, it becomes a much more important stat. Not only because we're running into a lot of poison in the next area, but because of other reasons as well. While we're here, let's go check in on Kale. He's another scatterbrain, so I'm a little leery of just leaving him to his own devices for too long. We can see that, in fact, another flame has lit up since we talked to Kale last.
Ah, yes. There is something I wanted to tell you. I was born in the land of Mirror. Mirror is also the home of an infamous killer, a knight in name alone. He was locked in the dungeon for multiple murders, but shortly before his execution he managed to escape. And the other day, I saw a fellow with a striking likeness, and then And then... Wait. Well, I think he looked rather similar. No, it's true. I saw just such a man, I swear. I believe his name was... Cray something. I believe. They shared some resemblance, I think.
Ah, yes, it must have been that scoundrel, mild-mannered Crate. More than likely, he's talking about Creighton, who we met recently. He didn't seem to be particularly well-adjusted. A little too bloodthirsty, I think. Seems that both of those characters need to have an eye kept on them, so as we progress, we might want to be careful. Of course, we want to be careful. Honestly, those two are probably the least of our worries. I'm going to go ahead and equip double combustion here for double the uses. Now, to begin the main part of this episode, we are returning to Huntsman's Copse to explore an optional area. You may have noticed that as we were exploring this area previously, there was a path that we did not take. We will be exploring that path now, after getting hit by things we really shouldn't. I guess that's what life gems are for. If you time it correctly, you can simply bypass that big artificial undead and head up here. However, even more gruesome foes await. There's another undead executioner here. Either executioner or torturer, I'm not sure which is the official name. At any rate, they are still incredibly powerful foes at this point in the game, and they cannot be underestimated. They also drop cracked red-eye orbs, if you're into that whole invasion thing. Given how early it is possible to access this area by talking to Licia after you meet her in Cade's Tower of Flame, coming here more or less right after you start the game can be very discouraging and will probably convince you to go somewhere else. Unless you specifically know what you're doing and you have a goal. Now then, this is a bit of a gauntlet. There are a total of 4 torturers here. They're all sitting up on those poles waiting to jump down and strike. To get through this area safely, it is vital that you pull them one at a time. If you do not, you will be overwhelmed and killed. Like, basically without question. With a lot of running away, kiting, and maybe some ranged attacks, it's possible to survive that battle, but it's much more trouble than it's worth. Just go slow and take it easy. This also introduces another variety of this kind of enemy. These torturers are using a whip. They are, far and away, I think, the least dangerous of the two kinds. They can still do a lot of damage, if you're inclined to let them. But when compared to that big axe, it's just hardly a contest. Now, up here is sort of a trap. Do not progress too far. These guys have very, eager aggro ranges, I guess you could say. If you do go too far, there's a good chance that you'll aggro 2 of these guys. And one of them is quite bad enough. Now, It's time for me to be honest. When I have died in these previous videos, it's usually more or less on purpose. I want to show why an area is dangerous, or what tactics might not work with certain weapons in certain situations, or to just sort of enhance the overall feel of the game, but here I'm just bad. I don't like this area. I'm bad about dealing with the executioners and the torturers and all these awful, awful people. I have no excuses. I don't like this area. I don't want to be here. Now, as you can see, the advantage to the falchion is that it can string together a lot of blows very quickly. And since we've upgraded a bit, and we have pretty high dexterity, we do quite a bit of damage with it if we get time with it uninterrupted. Unfortunately, the torturers have hyper armor when they attack, so you can only attack them for so long before you are faced with some pretty furious retaliation. Now, while these guys are very fearsome foes, they do have a weakness. They're very vulnerable to backstabs. Their attacks tend to leave them vulnerable for quite some time, and they take a while to recover from their more wild swings. So if you can take advantage of that window, you can kill them fairly easily, at least one-on-one. Over here again. I don't want to be too eager in picking up those souls, just in case I get more than I bargained for in terms of torturers dropping down. Blocking is... I would not really recommend it against these guys, but it's better than nothing. Their attacks can cause bleeding and they take off a lot of stamina, so be careful if your primary strategy is to block and then counterattack. Way forward a little bit safer, we can go ahead and recover our souls. Speaking of souls, these guys drop quite a bit, so if you're in the mood for farming and you have no fear of death, then it's not a bad idea to just spend some time with these guys. This is especially true if you want to do a lot of PvP, because, as mentioned, they drop those red-eye orbs. Frequently, actually. Like I said, the axe-wielding torturers are absolutely the more dangerous of the two. To sort of make up for this, they are also more vulnerable to backstabs from their whip-wielding co-workers, I guess you might call them. Just, you know, some crazy guy in a mask just goes to work every day, punches in, talks to his co-workers. How you doing, whip-wielding Bob? I'm doing fine, axe-wielding Al. And then you just unlock this guy to death, and I stop rambling. He's far and away the easiest one of these executioners. Torturers? Whatever, I don't care. They're fuckers is what they are. But the easiest way to deal with that guy is to just wait for him to drop down and hit him a lot. Now up here is an even greater foe. This great sword, great shield wielding dark spirit is incredibly difficult. His attacks do a lot of damage. They come out fairly quickly. They have a lot of reach, and they have a lot of lateral range as well. To make matters worse, blocking them will only get you so far because they do immense stamina damage. Now, you might think that wielding heavy weapons and running around in heavy armor like this might make this guy vulnerable to backstabs, but that's sort of not the case. Because of how frequently he swings his sword around and how much reach it has, actually getting around him to get into backstab position can be dangerous. As well as the fact that, quite honestly, due to the way he flails around so much, actually getting to that sweet spot where you can backstab him is also difficult. This is definitely a hard fight. It's made somewhat more difficult by the fact that I'm using a short-range weapon. I'm gonna be honest, and I'm pretty sure that swinging tatter got me killed there because I could not actually see him, so I thought it was safe to use a flask. But like I said before, at this point I'm just playing badly, so I'll try not to make excuses. Back at home base, I decided that it's time to switch up my strategy a little bit. Restore my humanity just for the extra health. Change back to the trusty spear so I have a little bit more reach, and now we're good to go. Experimenting with new weapons is great, and I highly recommend it because you might find something you really like. But if you're having trouble with it, then don't hesitate to go back to what you know works. Just gonna sneak by the big fat guy. These guys are basically serve the sole purpose of being distractions. Sometimes backstabs just, they don't work. It's not a big deal. I'm sure it's intended behavior. That, however, is not intended behavior, and at this point I make the executive decision to put the controller down, stop recording, maybe go get a drink, and come back to it. Several deaths later, we return to our great sword-wielding friend and hope for a rematch. With the spear, we should have a better time. The strategy remains mostly the same, though with the spear we have a little bit of extra defense and extra reach to help us. That said, he still will not go down without a fight. One thing you might notice about this Dark Spirit is that he uses player movesets. Unlike other humanoid enemies which have their own unique set of abilities and attacks, Dark Spirits are usually basically NPCs like Merciless Rowena, who use readily available weapons and armor and use the same abilities that the player can. This makes them difficult opponents because you're not really used to fighting them. Fortunately, by getting in a guard break, we're able to kill him pretty quickly. This can be a perilous jump, but the rewards are well worth it. We get a fire seed and a sublime bone dust. Alright, now that we're finally at our destination, the Undead Purgatory, we're going to rehuman up. Make sure we're topped off, equip the correct weapon, and head on inside. I decided to keep the Ring of Life Protection equipped for now because I'm really sick of this area. I briefly considered summoning this guy, but I decided against it. There's a reason for this. The Executioner's Chariot is very, very close to being a really cool fight. However, it's a puzzle boss. And puzzle bosses, well, they can be hit or miss. The first part of the puzzle is the fact that you need to kill off these necromancers as quickly as you can. If you leave them alive, the skeletons around the arena will just respawn indefinitely. Now, as is fairly obvious, the Chariot will make regular rotations around the room. He will damage both friend and foe. In this case, our only friend is us. And the only way to reliably avoid this, short of very precisely timed rolling, is to hide in these little alcoves. I'm using combustion here to deal with the necromancers because they take quite a bit of damage from fire, and because even short-range weapons will suffer in such close quarters. Trying to kill that necromancer with the mace, for instance, would probably just lead to it bouncing around all over the place off the walls. Now, with the necromancers dealt with and the skeleton threat largely neutralized, we can move on to the next part of this fight. After getting clocked in a menu because we're really paying attention! At any rate, to progress with this fight and actually do damage to the boss, we need to pull that lever. So let's wait until right as he passes, and then go ahead and activate the device. That lowers the portcullis, and as he makes his next go-around, he has a bit of a spill. However, unlike other puzzle bosses in this series, once the puzzle is solved, you actually have a legitimate fight on your hands. And given that you might have had to expend quite a few resources just to get to this point, the Executioner's Chariot horse can be a really difficult fight. For one thing, being a horse, it's surprisingly agile. And another thing, being a horse, getting hit by its hooves hurts a ton! The timing on a lot of its attacks are kind of weird. They have a strange delay to them because it's such a big thing. Blocking will only get you so far. For the most part, it will just break your guard and hit you anyway. Oh boy. Alright, one more try. Cutting out the trek back. This time we're going in with a slightly different strategy. The general idea remains the same. We need to sort of leapfrog from alcove to alcove. However, we can use this alluring skull to actually lure the skeletons away from us while we're hiding. However, it only works for so long, and we still have to take the time to get in here and deal with this necromancer. Now, as I flail around trying to hit the right target and not die, it sort of becomes apparent where part of this fight sort of starts to fall apart. The fact that it forces you into these tiny little alcoves for long periods of time, where the camera is probably your biggest enemy and you have literally no room to maneuver, you can very easily get boxed in by multiple skeletons and just you have no choice but to wait it out until the chariot comes by to knock them over. It's not very elegant. I don't like the way that is a strategy to deal with this fight. I wish wish there was a way to sort of not have to do this more reliably. But rolling is an even riskier proposition, and you still have to deal with the skeletons no matter where you are. I think that this is a very cool fight in concept, but in execution I'm not as big of a fan. Execution. Taking the time to make sure that we are safely ensconced in the alcove, I went ahead and equipped the spear again, just because at this point it's our most damaging weapon by a pretty good margin. It's time for round 2 with the horse. I actually managed to get the timing down better this time, so he doesn't manhandle me quite as badly. Aside from just generally smacking you around with his powerful hooves, the horse can also breathe this dark flame from both of his heads. He's also quite weak to fire. Not alluring skulls, though. I'm not really sure why I threw that at him, except as like a sign of defiance. Combustion is really helpful in this fight because it largely ignores a lot of the space constraints. Unfortunately, we cannot ignore skeleton restraint. As a nice touch, even when the actual chariot part is dead, the horse's attacks can still damage any surviving skeletons. Trying to fight this guy while the necromancers are still alive, though, is probably a really bad idea. I think that the big thing for me with this fight that I'm not a big fan of is just that because it is both a puzzle fight and an actual fight rolled into one, both aspects seem kind of underdone. So it's like, instead of getting a really cool puzzle fight like, say, the Dragon God from Demon Souls, you get a sort of lackluster one followed up by a fairly samey fight against a horse, which I guess is cool. You don't see many horses in this game, despite the fact that you see signs telling you to be wary of horses all the time. Maybe that's a New Game Plus thing. Now, that Soul of the Brave Warrior is just about the only thing worth picking up here, but against my better judgment, I decided to go and hoover up all the other pickups. The reward for my diligence is somewhat paltry. Fading souls are the lowest tier of consumable soul items, and they only give you 50 per use. I think that they are mostly put here as traps, to be honest. If you try and pick those up during the boss fight, you're almost guaranteed to take a tumble. And you won't even have anything particularly nice to show for it, except for 50 souls you will probably lose on your trek back. Which happens to be one of those irritating treks in the game. The boss run from the bonfire under the bridge to the Undead Purgatory is really irritating and also pretty long. However, this dark part of our life is over now, and we can reap our rewards, whatever they may be. Reward number 1, bonfire. Reward number 2, strange little man. And a bloodstain. Let's talk to the man.
Oh, welcome. Welcome. Do you have a lust for blood?
You know what? Sure, why not? Absolutely.
Yes, of course. Why else would you be here? Do you give yourself the armor?
If that's not a name you can trust, I don't know what is.
Then you will need blood. Lots of it. Undead blood, like your own. But it's not as easy as you think. What did he say? Join the Brotherhood of Blood?
I can see this choice having no ramifications.
That can hardly be the whole story. I want to hear what you really think. You want more than just a little blood. You want to be drenched in blood, mired in its foul stench. Am I right? Am I? Oh, just say that I'm right. Huh?
Oh my god, go away.
I knew it. I knew it. Fantastic. You're the best. Now you are a servant of Na'Alma. This crest of blood is yours. There. Another servant of blood is born. You will serve well, I just know you will. Well, how are we? Whatever you need, I've got it for you. You know anything about tokens of spite? Well, you can fight other blood servants with them. I'll reward you if you win with red orbs. You know, a cracked red eye orb. Use them to visit other worlds and seek more blood. Tell me if you need anything else. I'm very generous. Anything to get you covered in blood. Have you heard of the Blue Sentinels? They're a thorn in our sides, to say the least. Their men are obsessed with hunting down blood servants. Who cares? It's just another chance to spill more blood. Doesn't that excite you? You know anything about token? Tell.
Alright, we'll talk a little bit more about what being in the Brotherhood of Blood entails, a little bit more at a later date. But for now, we're gonna buy this big-ass scythe. Briefly contemplate that, but then realize it costs 20,000 souls. Buy a silver talisman for old time's sake, and this red sign soapstone because it's much more reasonably priced. And a couple pyromancies that we don't have. It's worth joining the Brotherhood of Blood just for access to some of those pyromancies and some unique weapons. Aside from that, though, you can take it or leave it. Chichigren is a weirdo. And that should do it. I am personally very relieved to be done with this area of the game.